Manana Sitsua Simina 35 na legislature Guahan is back from recess. Senator Joe San Augustine, I will recognize you on Bill 136-35 COR.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place Bill 136-35 COR on the third reading file, and I would like to discuss it.
On that motion, Senator San Augustine, you may proceed.
Thank you. Hafez and buenas, Madam Speaker, and to all my colleagues. Bill 136-35 COR is an act to amend Section 3105, Article 1, Chapter 3, Title 22, Guam Code annotated relative to responsibly raising the minimum wage. The intent of Bill 136 is to responsibly raise Guam's minimum wage with a 50-cent increment effective March 1st, 2020, making it $8.75, and a second 50-cent increment effective March 1st, 2021, making it $9.25. Our business community received federal and local tax breaks, and it's time to pay it forward. Those earning minimum wage are not just entry-level workers. They include our veterans, persons with disability, and manamko. They also include a disproportionate number of women, single mothers, and minorities. For several weeks prior to the introduction of the bill, I put a call for comments. I got visits, calls, and emails from many making $8.25 or less who struggled to make ends meet. They argue that the cost of living continues to rise, but their wages have not kept pace with inflation. The unfortunate reality is that many of our families live in poverty. A dollar raise over 2 years is a small step, but it may make a difference in the lives of so many. I also heard from and met with many of our small business owners who are understandably concerned about the possible impact on them. With input from those meetings, this prompted a revision to reflect 2 increments. This allows our business community a reasonable amount of time for implementation. I believe it's achievable and is the right thing to do. During this time, I met a representative of the Guam chapter of the Society for Human Resource Management, or SHRM, and human resource personnel are also members of the Guam Chamber of Commerce, the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association, and many other organizations. SHRM conducted a poll of its members and found a majority agreed the minimum wage should be increased, and the increase should be made in increments, just as the legislation proposes. Dr. Roseanne Jones, an economist with the University of Guam, presented results from a study they conducted on the minimum wage. Their study reflected that there were very minimal to no negative impacts to businesses. In fact, their study showed that the raising of the minimum wage greatly encouraged business to reevaluate their practices to become more competitive in their market. This bill would allow business owners time to make necessary adjustments, so employees' benefit may not be affected. I know there are differing opinions on both sides, so I welcome the discussion on the bill and appreciate and welcome the sentiments of my colleagues. This is the bottom line. When people have even just a little more money in their paychecks each month, their increased purchasing power stimulates our local economy, and when our people prosper, our local business grow and our island flourishes. I wish to thank my colleagues for their support as co-sponsors of the bill. Yourself, Madam Speaker, Senator Regine Besco-Lee, Senator Jose Piro Charlay, Senator Clint Rigel, Senator Kelly Mars Taitano, Senator Talina Nelson, Senator Sabina Perez, Senator Therese Charlay, and Senator Amanda Shelton. And I ask my colleagues to support this measure as we work toward bringing some financial relief to our people who need it the most.
When Pobetso, Senator San Augustine, anyone else on the main amendment, main motion? Main motion? Senator Moylan? On the main motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I actually wish to, I am in support of the bill as presented by my colleague, and I think it's important, but I also wish to make a amendment to the bill.
Please proceed.
Thank you. This amendment is similar to a provision outlined in the Fair Labor Standards Act, also known as the FLSA, addressing minimum wages for juveniles. Yesterday I handed out the amendment, so I'm hoping all my colleagues as well as the committee up here have the amendment as provided. If anybody doesn't have it, please let me know. So the amendment reads, it's adding subsection 3105.2 regarding youth minimum wage. For the purposes of this subsection, a youth shall be under the age of 18 years of age. Notwithstanding any other provisions of the law, every employer shall pay a youth employee at a rate not less than $8.25 per hour, effective April 1st, 2020. However, the youth minimum wage shall only apply for a period not to exceed 90 consecutive days. Also included with the amendment was handed out the fact sheet for the youth minimum wage from the Fair Labor Standards Act, which provides a lot of information and answers some basic questions there too. How this amendment, though we are using the FLSA, it's slightly different than what the federal government is doing for the minimum wage for youth. So the federal government is saying the minimum wage should not be less than $4.25 for employees under the age of 20. This amendment being proposed allows the minimum wage to be $8.25 under the age of 18. So two changes are the amount being paid, and the other is the age when it shall stop. So the question is, why is a youth minimum wage needed? In most cases, there's a clear distinction an employer makes when hiring juveniles versus adults. With the youth who is under the age of 18, the assumption is a temporary position, one where you may lose the youth after a summer break or graduation. Versus an adult, the intent is to mold the individual to grow with your organization. So there are indications that when this legislation is enacted, the minimum wage increase, that the ones impacted are the youth. Because as wage increases equals and increases the operation expenses, and thus if I'm hiring somebody at an entry-level wage, I would prefer one with more longevity. So this amendment helps our youth gain employment for those summer breaks. And it's meant just for that temporary period, and that's how the 90 days came up. The amendment shall incentivize the employer to want to hire youth who are looking for short employment time. Okay. Now, the youth minimum wage is not a new concept. And in 1996, the amendments to the FLSA allowed employers to pay a youth minimum wage of not less than $4.25, as we mentioned, an hour to employees who are under the age of 20 for 90 days. And again, my amendment is saying it should be $8.25 for the 90-day period, but under the age of 18. Again, why is there a 90-day calendar limit on the youth minimum wage period? Well, the FLSA included certain protections for employees that prohibit employers from displacing any employee in order to hire someone at a youth minimum wage. So basically, Madam Speaker, I think this would strengthen the bill and would incentivize employers to hire the youth. especially those who are just looking for a summer job, and incentivizing them by having their wage at $8.25, just for a limited 90-day period. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm open to any questions on the amendment. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Senator Moylan. There has been an amendment placed by Senator James Moylan. Anyone wishing to speak to the amendment? Senator Mary, did you want to speak? Yes, please proceed.
If the author will so yield, how do we justify to the employers an amendment that proposes to raise the present minimum wage for youth from $4.20 as it currently stands on Guam to $8.25? Has there been any thought or discussion about the impact or whether that will discourage anyone from in fact hiring youth because of the exponential increase from $4.20 to $8.25 should this amendment pass? So just any thoughts on that issue if the author will so yield?
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Moylan, would you like to yield to the question?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the question. I'll be happy to. Basically, the amendment is, if the bill goes forth without this amendment, then the employer is responsible to pay the employee the increase in minimum wages. The employer, this is not mandating that they do this as well. I mean, they can stick with the increase in minimum wage, what the bill is offering, or they have the option to use the amendment at $8.25. I think it strengthens the employer's options by knowing that an employee is just asking for a summer job while on his break from school, rather than knowing that employee will be there for a longevity of time. So by paying less, but in actuality, I really can't say that we ever used the $4.25 to start with as well for us here on Guam. So this will actually introduce something that we can use to incentivize the employer to hire youths for limited terms. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Torres, you still have the floor. Does that answer your inquiry?
Not entirely, because the amendment uses the word shall, so I don't necessarily agree that it's optional. But what this does do, though, is it brings the age down from 20 to 18, so it narrows the window. So I guess there is a compromise in that regard. But I just wanted to I just wanted to bring that up if there was any feedback on that, because I think that as a parent, it certainly is to everyone's advantage that your child have the opportunity to raise money even at a young age, say a 14-year-old going in and getting a job, or a 16-year-old to earn this kind of money and be productive. And in that regard, I think that this amendment is good to give true pay for valued labor for youth. So that is a good thing. I just, I'm concerned that it's quite a leap, but then again, that's within the employer's prerogative to hire or not to hire. They can so afford. But I thank the author for his answers.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Shelton, Legislative Secretary, I will recognize you at this time.
Sitius Masi, Madam Speaker, I rise in objection to the amendment. I think that if we pay a fair wage to to our youth, they will definitely we give them the opportunity to do a good job. And I think giving the employers flexibility to do that and to pay our young people what they rightfully deserve for doing the same job as somebody who's older than them is only right. I have many times been the youngest person in the room, and I don't think I would appreciate being paid a lower wage than one of our colleagues. And so for young people who want to lift themselves up, who want to provide for their families, who want to make a better life for themselves, I don't think that we should be legislating a lower wage for them. And I think it's only right that we pay them the same amount. A couple of weeks ago, we met with some school administrators who shared that they have students who are working, who are 17 years old, trying to put food on the table for them and for their children. And you know, they're doing their best with what they can do. And adding an extra barrier to employment and to an opportunity for them to do well and provide, I think doesn't strengthen our island, it doesn't strengthen our community. So I rise in objection, but I'd also like to offer an amendment to this amendment.
You may proceed with that
Okay.
amendment.
So to strike out 90 consecutive days and to change it to 32 hours. So the thinking behind this amendment would be that it would last for one pay period.
So
In the event that this amendment does pass, that we would limit this youth minimum wage to only what we'd see as a part-time pay period, up to 32 hours.
So if I may, Senator, Legislative Secretary, change the words 90 consecutive days to 32 hours, delete 90 consecutive days.
Correct, thank you.
Okay, we're going to save a tree here, colleagues. So the amendment to the Shelton's amendment to the main Moylan amendment. Anyone wishing to speak on that? Is there an objection? Senator Moylan, to Senator Shelton's amendment to your main amendment. Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I object. Well, first, I want to thank the Senator for the comments and making the amendment to the amendment. But I wish to clarify, and the reason I object is the 90 consecutive days is calendar days. And the purpose of the federal requirement at that time was to allow students who are on, for example, summer break during their 90-day period. So they're going to go to an employer and say, hey, I'd like to work for you over my summer break. You know, I got 3 months off, will you hire me? And the employer's going to think, well, maybe if I got a special project, but in actuality, I'd rather have somebody long-term, because then you're going to leave. So the incentive is for that 90-day period at 825 for that employer to be willing to hire the student while he's on break during the summer. So to limit that to just 32 work week, that's, and it wouldn't really wouldn't really help the employer wanting to make that decision rather than to hire somebody on a permanent basis. So I think that will be a discouragement to the employer to hire that youth. And so really the original amendment is to incentivize, to get more kids on the summertime to work. There's a lot of them out there that just want to work during the summer or during the spring break. They got time off. And this really gives them the opportunity to do that. At the same time, you know, it's up to the employer to say, you know, well, I'll pay you the fair wage because I know that you're good at what you do. Or after the 90-day period, it's actually done. At the end of the 90-day period, then they go to whatever the prevailing wage is at the time. If that student's able to work on weekends, Then after that 90-day period, if the minimum wage at that point is $10 per hour, then it's $10 per hour. But also the 90 consecutive days was to not displace any other employee there from losing their job, because the employer could hire a juvenile, a youth, and keep on doing that and not hire a full-time employee and an adult. So that 90-day period was in there to prevent the abuse also of hiring youth to avoid paying the current minimum wage. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. On the Shelton amendment, if no one else, Senator Shelton, would you like to close or call for the vote? Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate what the previous speaker had to say about the 90 days, the thought behind the 90 days, but I think that the 32 hours, he mentioned wanting to allow for short-term periods of work over summer breaks, but I know there are many youth who would like to work part-time jobs for the duration of their high school life or their duration of their college life, and aren't just looking for summer employment. I think young people, there are many young people in high school right now who are working part-time jobs year-round. And from my personal experience, I was one of them. The dream of my parents was to have me go to a Catholic school. That was all they wanted for me, but they couldn't afford it. And so I worked from the time I was a freshman until the time I was a senior, a part-time job, a few days after school, so that I could pay for my tuition. And that's something that maybe other students want to do. They want to provide for make an impact in their personal families, help their parents out. And so I don't think that it would be beneficial to allow them to be paid this wage up until a 90-day period. I'd like to see them get paid the wage as soon as possible. And so if a timeline is needed, then I propose this 32 hours.
Thank you, Senator Legislative Secretary Shelton. There has been an objection to the Legislative Secretary Shelton's amendment to the Moylan Amendment. So all those who support Legislative Secretary Shelton, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. On the main amendment, Senator Torres, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rose previously with a point of inquiry, but I'm now rising to
On the main
motion,
amendment.
yes.
Yes, that's why I'm recognizing.
To express my support for the amendment. And the point that I'd like to raise is, when we think about labor and jobs and why people seek to be gainfully employed, there is an advantage to having this type of an amendment, I believe, in that it doesn't allow, it prevents an employer from discriminating against employees based on age solely. Insofar as a person may be hired at a young age under a small the lesser salary, and then when they reach a certain age, they're then let go because they're not as cost effective. So I think in this regard, you treat an employee with the dignity and value for services rendered as you would a youth, as you would an adult. And so I think that it sets a good precedent and perhaps is a good incentive for young people to become gainfully employed as earliest as possible on our island. And I think it just sets a good work ethic from an early age. So I support this amendment. Thank you.
Situs Masi, Senator Torres. Anyone else? Senator Lee, you are recognized.
Situs Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to a point of inquiry for the proffer of this amendment.
Please state your question. Thank you.
So in reviewing the amendment, one question that came to mind is, what would protect if this amendment should pass and the bill should pass, what would protect these youth workers from being hired for 89 days and being let go by an employer who could potentially rehire them the day after that? What protections are in place for that youth worker?
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Moylan, would you like to yield to the question?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the question. Let me repeat. So I think the question is, if the employer decided I'm going to hire the high school student on his summer break, and the period is for the minimum wage for the youth at $8.25 is for 90 consecutive days. If the employer, I employed the student, and after 50 days I say, thank you very much, I no longer need you. Basically it's at free will. So it's up to the employer to want to do that, just like if he was to hire somebody at the prevailing minimum wage as well. The 90 consecutive days is more that the employer doesn't keep on hiring youths and not hire adults in replacement who, could be, by that time, could be $1 more per hour, and look for cheap labor and use. You can't do that. That would be against federal law. So there's nothing to stop the employer to say, okay, after 1 week of working, I no longer need you either. Or there's nothing to stop the employer from saying, after 90 days, would you like to work for me on the weekends, and I'm going to pay you the prevailing minimum wage. Because the 90 days is calendar days. It's not number of days that you work. And if the student decided, I want to, I'm going on vacation with my family, and I can only work 50 days, that's fine too. That's up to the employer if he wants to hire him or that student then as well. But that 90 days continues from the time you first start working. And then it runs out when you come on back, and if the employer liked you, they had to pay you at the current prevailing wage. And maybe that's a good thing too. The employer could be happy with the job performance of that student during that time, and is more than willing to take him back on a Saturday or Sunday, or just to work in the warehouse or something. So, no, there's nothing to prevent that, but at least the student had the opportunity to gain employment and to gain work experience. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Moylan. Senator Lee.
Jesus Masi, Madam Speaker, and I thank the retiring speaker for his response, and it just goes to show that there really is no protection in place for these youth workers. Madam Speaker, it's important for us to remember that an example would be two workers flipping burgers side by side. One happens to be 17 years old and one happens to be 21 years old. They're flipping burgers at the exact same rate, but one is getting paid more than the other. It's just not equitable, Madam Speaker. So I rise in opposition to this amendment, and I also feel that the reality of the situation is so many working families on Guam, like one of the retiring speakers had mentioned, are working to support the entire family. Many members of the family, students, are pushed to get jobs after school, to assist their family, to help their families just get by. This is not just summer jobs we're talking about, Madam Speaker. And the retiring speaker mentioned that, during their summer break, that they would only be working a certain amount of days and then they could go vacation with their families. But the reality is many families on Guam can't afford to go on vacation. They can't afford these basic necessities, keeping water running, keeping the lights on. And that's the reason for this entire bill. And we really need to be listening to our community. We need to be listening to many working families who are already struggling just to make ends meet. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
We're going to go ahead and take a moment's recess. We're going to work with legal on something. Legislature is back from recess. Senator Jim, I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge you right now. I understand you have a motion to withdraw.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, I'd like to move to withdraw my original amendment after advice with the legal counsel, which is doing a great job, by the way.
Thank you.
I wish to reintroduce
On
another
that
amendment.
motion to withdraw the amendment, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Senator Jim, you still have the floor. I will go ahead and acknowledge you that for this new amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment is for the bill, which for line 10 of page 1 to amend the bill to read subsection 3105.2 is hereby added to Chapter 3, Title 22, Guam Code annotated to read. For the purposes of this subsection, a youth individual shall be under the age of 18 years of age. Notwithstanding any other provisions of law, every employer shall pay a youth employee at a rate of not less than $8.25 per hour during the first 90 consecutive calendar days after initial employment, which shall begin on the first day of work for the employer. The youth minimum wage shall be effective on April 1st, 2020. This this new amendment is more in line to mirror the Fair Labor Standards Act in regards to minimum wage for the youth. So basically, we are following the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act for our youth to be gainfully employed and adding the employer's incentive to hire our youth. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Jim. On the amendment, anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? Senator San Augustine, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I object to any amendment to the bill. Number one, if we follow the bill as intended, it was to raise the minimum wage, period. If this amendment was to pass, I understand his intent. I understand he mentioned the Fair Labor Act, whatever the federal government wants to say. We need to understand that, number one, the only time that the federal law can be enforced is only if it's greater than what we intend to try to pass and implement. So in other words, if we said that the minimum wage would be $4, Fair Labor Act would say, no, it's $4.25. We can't go any less than $4. $4.25. But the bill, it was very specific, was to raise the minimum wage. The only thing I'm really worried about is that 90 days. Okay, if this was to pass, then every 90 days we're going to get another set of youth working in the industry. That means everybody that was trying to make a living will basically be unemployed. And I just hate to see all the youth out there every 90 days, 14 to 17 years old, never mind about going to school, never mind about studying. Let's concentrate on making $8.25. The bill was to raise the minimum wage across the board for all. So if the businesses want to pay for youth, well then pay them the minimum wage, and let's just stay with that program. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Senator Pito, por favor, consigue.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. You know, I stand before my colleague here in support of this particular bill. But we cannot be, there shouldn't be any discriminatory on the time frame. That 90 hours is, we need to leave it up to the employer. And that 90 hours, and I'm making that amendment to take that 90 days out and just continue. If the employer is saying that both employees are doing great, are doing what they need to do, and then after 90 days, just like the previous speaker had mentioned, we're not going to be going after 90 days, we're going to go to another 90 days. I think we should just get rid of that 90 days requirement and leave it up to the employer. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Buen provecho, Senator Terlai, Pito Terlai. Anyone else on the Moylan amendment? If not, Senator Jim, you can close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for the discussion. In closing, ultimately, I believe that creating a youth minimum wage provides a balance to this minimum wage increase. This amendment is fair, and while it does not provide an adequate savings for small businesses, it does provide opportunities for juveniles who may not see a similar opportunity if Bill 136-35 passes without this amendment. So I kindly ask my colleagues to help the youth seeking short-term employment to be hired with the passage of this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator James. There has been an amendment proffered by Senator Moylan, and there has been an objection. All those in support of Senator Moylan's amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Anybody else on the main motion from Senator Joe San Augustine's main question? Senator Will Castro, Minority Leader, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of the bills introduced by the chairman, but I do want to state for the record that it's my firm belief that a minimum wage increase without the right policy mix, could be a major problem. Again, I want to state for the record that I support an increase in the minimum wage, but I also support some relief to our local businesses who are struggling to make ends meet. I support it, but I'm compelled to issue a word of caution. We're signaling that we want our working class at the entry level to have a level of compensation so that their buying power and their earning power is increased. And I couldn't agree more. If, Madam Speaker, if we're able to strike the right balance, I also believe that we're also signaling to current businesses, both large and small, that we are ratcheting up the cost of doing business and ultimately, mark my words, the cost of living on Guam. I can only hope that this initiative is part of a greater scheme, a greater strategic fiscal policy mix, one that encourages private sector growth that may diversify this economy outside that of the military-industrial complex and tourism. But as it stands, as I stand here today in this space and time, what I see is that we're asking business owners, all of them, to pay more in taxes for what you gross, pay more in taxes for improvements to properties that are at a certain threshold. And now we're asking the very business owners who wake up early, who tirelessly work, who restlessly sleep, worrying if the shelves are stacked with goods for local families to buy. Some even worry if the infrastructure is set, if there's a leak in the piping so that they don't have to pay more. Some of them who lose sleep at times, depending on the fiscal time of year, worrying if their employees will come in the next day or if they have enough to make payroll. We're asking business owners to pay more regardless of time and grade, education, or some other basis for a meritable increase. Many already do, Madam Speaker. I think we're all fully aware that many businesses already provide a wage, a compensation package that's above the minimum wage. The last thing they want or encourage or need is another government mandate to do so. Again, let me state for the record that I support an increase in a minimum wage, and I see the value in an increased spending dollar and value. But my concern today, Madam Speaker, is registered. It's registered for the effects it can have upon small businesses and upon the economy in general, how it could affect the cost of goods sold and ultimately the cost of living here on Guam. I remember last term, Madam Speaker, my colleagues called for an increase in the minimum wage in order that working families could take home more and buy the things they need for their families, and I get it. But the data that was presented at the time focused on large and mature industries. And in that context, Madam Speaker, I get it. I mean, it didn't make sense to me either that diligent, hardworking, loyal employees for many years stayed with an employer who grossed millions and perhaps even benefited from certain tax certificates and abatements. And for all we know, was part of a grander, larger international conglomerate where capital flight was real, where money that was spent here was sent there. But what I'm chiefly concerned about, Madam Speaker, is that group, the percentage of companies. There's a much greater percentage of companies that are right here on Guam. There are a lot of employers out there that are in the villages, Madam Speaker, that are locally owned, managed, and operated. It's my opinion that whenever we increase taxes and raise rates, albeit for the rate of compensation or the rate at which we bill for power and water, we're ultimately affecting the cost of doing business. Like most of us, like most of you, I get up each day and go to the village store to buy snacks for my kids before we take them to school. I buy ice, we buy drinks, we buy snacks, and I shop at Uggan Store, Madam Speaker, or sometimes we make our way to Payless and we buy those things there. And whether it's the small village store or those bulk purchase stores, the reality is this, that when you raise taxes, fees, water, wastewater costs, rates of compensation for employees, we are really making it that much more costly for businesses to stay alive and in turn for consumers to buy everyday items. And with this said, Madam Speaker, again, I want to emphatically state my support for the minimum wage, but want to encourage us to take a balanced approach. I heard my colleague state earlier, and so I'll refrain from making the amendment, but I will state and project that I intend on introducing a bill that would incorporate what would have been my amendments. The good chairman stated that he objects to any amendment, period, to the bill as it stands, and I respect that, Mr. Chairman. but I will respectfully request the chairman and my colleagues that we move on considering an education opt-out clause where an employee may choose not to accept a raise up to the minimum wage set forth herein, but instead choose to apply the balance that he or she would have earned towards some kind of education voucher to UOG or GCC, and that may be transferable. You see, Madam Speaker, I know people personally who earn a minimum wage, and they're perfectly fine with that. They're just wanting to make that extra dollar after retirement, or for whatever reason, are okay. They're content with that. I would much rather see that increase go to their son or daughter. I'd also like us to consider, Madam Speaker, in future legislation, a GRT abatement to those businesses that are affected by minimum wage, that they be able to apply a dollar-for-dollar tax exemption to the GRT. I think it's fair. We're going to ask them to pay their employees more. We're taxing them again at the top. So couldn't we offer a little tax reprieve? After all, it is a win-win. Madam Speaker, I'm afraid that if we don't do this, we're sending the wrong message to business operators on Guam and potential on as well as off-island investors. Madam Speaker, we can acknowledge there are two major pillars of this economy, tourism and the military-industrial complex. And we're not doing ourselves any good when we increase taxes, increase the cost of owning a building to operate a business, or to own a home if it meets a certain threshold. Instead, we should be giving businesses every reason to grow on Guam or to come to Guam. And in the greater context, with the right fiscal policy mix. But this is not the message we're sending. In closing, Madam Speaker, I support an increase in the minimum wage, but we must recognize that these matters of private enterprise, should be left to private businesses. I believe in a system of compensation that's competitive and based on what one can afford. I believe that this increase in the minimum wage should provide the necessary tax relief to affected businesses in order that we may continue to grow and that our businesses, the smaller business, can remain and continue to stay open. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senator Castro. Anyone else on the main motion? Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Senator Joseph Knox, you can close. On the main motion. Senator Lee, I will recognize you. On the main bill.
Mrs. Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this measure because we need to raise wages for our working poor. We need to recommit ourselves to this basic belief. If you work full-time, you will earn at least enough to get by. The latest Consumer Price Index data from the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, which measures the rate of inflation and the cost of living on Guam, shows that since the last minimum wage increase in 2014, the cost of living on Guam has increased 10%, effectively undoing any financial relief felt 5 years ago at the last minimum wage increase. Many opponents of this measure argue that raising the minimum wage will kill jobs or make it harder for businesses to hire new workers. However, increasing the rate to $9.25 only affects 7% of the island's workforce. The 2018 Guam Occupational Employment Stats survey provided by the US DOL shows that the average wages for jobs traditionally assumed to be paid minimum wage are already higher than the proposed $9.25 rate. These occupations, Madam Speaker, include housekeepers, security guards, food preparation and serving related occupations, restaurants, fast food cooks, bartenders, janitors, tour guides, cashiers, retail salespersons, receptionists, and hotel desk clerks. Once again, Madam Speaker, all the average wages for these jobs, according to the latest available data, local data, are already higher than $9.25. Our local economic experts agree that raising the minimum wage will not represent a major hit to most companies' bottom lines. They predict only marginal increases to personnel costs. The research led by economist Dr. Roseanne Jones at the University of Guam showed that following the last minimum wage increase, most businesses did not reduce employee hours. Businesses increased investments in employee training and in new revenue streams, and 3/4 of businesses did not reduce their number of employees on staff. Additionally, economist Joe Bradley stressed his own research in testimony on the measure, which showed the most consistent results of decades of data concerning minimum wage increases that, one, the impact of price inflation linked to the minimum wage increases is, quote, quite small, and most often statistically insignificant. Two, contrary to the conventional wisdom, unemployment rates don't go down. Unemployment rates do go down. And three, in Bradley's review of more than 30 years of data, there is no link found between the local minimum wage rate and prices, payroll employment, or the unemployment rate. This measure simply seeks to reestablish a wage floor, Madam Speaker, to ensure that in these austere times, our people can count on a rate that they can fall back on. As Dr. Jones said, and I quote, "In case things begin to fall, we have an automatic stabilizer for wage rates. And with increases in the cost of living on Guam, this wage floor must be increased from time to time to respond to the changing economic conditions on our island." Madam Speaker, we don't live in a bubble. The idea of ceteris paribus, that we should hold other things constant when considering economic issues, doesn't work in cases where people struggle every day to make ends meet. No family and no business lives in a vacuum. This measure to increase the minimum wage is but one piece of the puzzle, and it would help everyone to see the bigger picture here. That corporate tax revenues decreased by 49% since 2014. That we are working to extend the life of the Guam Registered Apprenticeship Program that provides business tax credits to build our skilled workforce, and that we provided an effective tax cut of nearly half of existing BPT liabilities of local small businesses. Madam Speaker, this legislature, with members from both sides of the aisle, have enacted or are pursuing measures that increase government tax incentives to businesses, that raise benefits and protections to employees, that extend successful public-private partnerships and create more skilled labor training opportunities, measures that build up the portfolio of higher education offerings and plant the seeds of new industry. We recognize, Madam Speaker, that minimum wage earners are both Democrat and Republican, and they're both in need at this time. Our island's economy is helped by all of these policies in total, and yes, that includes raising the minimum wage to help our poorest workers make ends meet. The plain and perhaps inconvenient truth is, despite well-intentioned objections, the actual impacts are never as bad as the predictions from those who stand in opposition. In addition, Madam Speaker, minimum wage earners spend their money locally, in our economy, supporting our local businesses. Madam Speaker, like Dr. Jones expressed months ago, I too am tired of the minimum wage conversation. I support this measure, and I look forward to passage so we can focus our attention on building the economic engine around the professional middle wage rate, that we should provide every opportunity, pursue every avenue, and progress every facet of the economy to ensure that we build up our workforce, our families, and our people. Sidwasmasi.
Buen provecho, Senator Lee. Senator Joseph Augustine, you can close. Oh, Senator Terlahi, I do apologize, Senator. Therese Terlahi, I will give you an opportunity on the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As noted, I was one of the sponsors of this bill, and I rise in support of the bill. I think that the discussion on minimum wage was actually very, very helpful for our community. And we've seen that in the United States presidential election discussions and in their Congress right now, minimum wage is a very important topic. And all these discussions are aimed at, how to get the perfect balance of wages and other economic opportunity in our community so that the entire community can be lifted up. And one of the interesting parts of the discussion, Madam Speaker, was by Dr. Jones in her presentation at the University of Guam, where she noted, and this is noted in many studies across the nation, that even with this increase in minimum wage, it might not impact the poverty levels for households that we have on Guam or their eligibility for welfare. That we are actually not, by this wage, creating a living wage that is going to get these families off of poverty and, so raise the whole community up at once. And that's the unfortunate part of this bill, but she did also point out that our employers, for the most part, are already employing almost everyone above this wage that we will be enacting. So the bill proposes the wage to be $9.25 per hour, and according to Dr. Jones, she said the lowest wages are $8.86 in food services. This is our 2018 figures. And then $9.05 for child care workers. $9.32 for house cleaners, $9.53 for desk clerks, $9.96 for bakers. So I guess it was good news to me that our employers they were already paying above the minimum wage that is in the law right now. But the very, very sad part of the news is that the wages are still just too low for families who are working. And we want to encourage working. We want to grow an economy based on work and allow, single mothers to work and actually support their families. We want that to happen, but unfortunately, even with this change today, this may not be possible. It still keeps their family below poverty. The other interesting thing that I appreciate from the discussion was that Dr. Jones suggested that the market forces show that really our community can adopt to a $10.10 wage. And as you look across the nation, the wages are going to be, if they pass the bills that they are proposing, much higher than the $9.25 that we are proposing here today. So I stand in support of this legislation, but I do agree that our community has a lot more work to do in order to raise all of our people up to a standard of living where, they can live in dignity and that they can work and that we can all work and that working is not going to negatively impact our families, but positively impact our families. And so I want to thank all of the business owners that came out to testify and the organizations that came out to testify on this bill. And I want you to know that we hear you, and we hear your concern that we are raising minimum wage while, the legislature continues to hold an increased BPT compared to a couple years ago. And I share that concern. I think we really do need to focus on a full picture, full economy approach and do those together. so that we don't inadvertently create more problems than we are trying to solve here. But I do support an increase in the wages. It looks like it's going to have a minimum impact on the number of employees who are, or employee years that will be mandated to raise wages. Of course, there will be other effects, but I think we have to keep a close eye on employers and coverage of healthcare, and make sure that we can come to a system that allows people to live with a wage that they can support their families, but also where employers can provide health insurance for their people. Situs Masi, Madam Speaker.
Buen provecho, Senator Therese. If no one else wishes to speak on the main motion, on the question, I will acknowledge Senator Joseph Augustine for the closing. Put for board consent.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With all that's been said, I move to place Bill 136-35 on the third reading and voting file.
On that motion, without any objection, motion carries. Situs Masi. Senator Clint Rigel on bill number 149-35 will move to resolve, and then we'll take a recess. Come here. Senator Clint Rigel on bill number 149-35 COR. You are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Bill 149-35 COR seeks to accomplish 5 objectives.
Senator Clint, if I may, you first need to move it to the third reading for discussion.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I move that we place the bill into the third reading file for discussion.
As amended.
Yes, I move that we place Bill 149-35 COR as amended into the third reading file for discussion.
On that motion, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The bill is pretty straightforward. It seeks to accomplish 5 objectives. 1, reduce $17.5 million originally intended for a new Port Authority of Guam administration building to $10,445,000. 2, reduce the $14.2 million originally set aside for the H Wharf to $13,774,000 $774,255 to reflect the actual project costs. 3, allocate the resulting $7.4 million for improvements to Gulf Pier, allowing a connectivity line to be installed at F1 to allow discharged loaded fuel to be routed to and from other petroleum fuel companies' storage tanks, and to integrate the terminal operating system and financial management system, and upgrade the port's current information technology system so that accurate financial data on the expenses rendered to vessel operations and related services versus revenues received is known. 4, to mandate any remaining balances from the projects listed within the bill to be allocated as supplemental funding for the procurement of a new gantry crane, should there be any remaining balances. 5, to continue the practice of all port projects costing $1 million or more to be subject to the approval of the PUC. Additionally, GITA has verified the proposed reprogramming effort has passed the scrutiny of its bond counsel and is in compliance with the terms of the bond indenture as it relates to any uses of the PAG bond proceeds. I ask my colleagues to support this measure and assist the Port Authority in its port modernization efforts. Again, it's a straightforward measure. It's not seeking any additional borrowing capacity. These are for bond proceeds that are bonds that are already in existence and proceeds that are already available to the port. What this would allow the port to do is restructure how they are able to spend those proceeds, as they were previously restricted in prior legislation on how those proceeds could be spent. So this would allow them, instead of spending a lot of the money on building a new administrative building, the port has proposed and their board has approved that they instead spend more of the money on capital improvement projects, to wharf projects and pier projects, instead of spending it on a fancy new building. They've agreed to refurbish the existing building, make some improvements to the existing building, and instead spend the remainder of the proceeds on capital improvement projects. Thank you.
Sitso Smasi, Senator Clinton. Anybody on the main motion? Senator Therese, you will,
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
can you state your point of
Yes.
order? Has there been a violation? On the point of order,
The point of
please.
order is whether we should be in the committee of the whole. I know that this bill doesn't say the word appropriation in it, but it is refinancing a bond, or it's not refinancing a bond, but it's rededicating where the bond proceeds are going to be spent, which is very significant, Madam Speaker. And in fact, the bill changes the amounts allocated to each project. So I think it would benefit all of us to have a committee of the whole, as we do for all appropriation measures, and that we call the Port Authority in just to be able to provide information, or GITA. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So on the colleagues, I'm going to take a moment's recess just so that I can get further justification. Y Mina 35 na legislatura in Guahan is back from recess. To my colleagues, there was a point of order in reference to section 6.04, consideration item number D, sub D, item number 3, committee of the whole. And it specifically says that bills reported to a legislature in Guahan containing an appropriation shall be considered by a legislature in Guahan in a committee of the whole. The bill proffered before us is a bill that talks about the redirection of the funds that have already been appropriated from a previous time. So I will contend that there is no violation at this time, unless anyone wishes to, the body would like to overrule my ruling by a majority, or if there's any proffer for any waiver, those would be considered. But I want to note that there is no violation at this time. Senator Therese.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Then I would make a motion that we convene in the Committee of the Whole, because as you say, if the bill does not contain the word appropriation but uses the word reprogramming, I just don't want us as a legislature where we have a rule that says for all appropriations, even for $2 appropriation bills, we're supposed to automatically convene
Yes,
in
Senator,
Committee of the Whole.
yes.
But if we're going to convene and reprogram millions of dollars, that we don't have to do the same type of
Senator, thank you very much. On the
Committee
motion
of the Whole.
to go
yeah.
into the committee of the whole, as proffered by you, is not debatable, or I will accept the motion. There has been a motion presented on the floor to go into the committee of the whole. Is there an objection? There is an objection, not debatable. All those in favor to go into the committee of the whole as proffered by Senator Therese Terlahi, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. On the main motion, anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion? If not, Senator Perez, you are recognized, and then after you, I will recognize Senator Terlahi. Therese Terlahi. Senator Perez, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just have a point of inquiry.
Please state your point of inquiry.
Yeah, so in regarding to Section 2A, are there any estimated bond proceeds? That's one question.
May you repeat the question one more time? I apologize, I didn't hear that.
Sure. In the bill, Section 2A, 7, it states all remaining balances, if any, shall be allocated to provide for supplemental funding for the procurement of a new gantry crane. So the question is, are there any estimated bond proceeds?
Senator Clint Rigel, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. I believe the question is referring to any extra money going to the gantry crane, is that correct? So there's nothing estimated, it's just there in case the costs are less than what they anticipated. So in other words, if they have an extra leftover bond proceeds aside from those projects that are outlined there, then that additional bond proceeds would go towards the purchase of a new gantry crane.
Senator Perez.
All right, so I guess the other thing is Section 3 on page 6 of the bill. Oh, wait, sorry. No, that's okay. The other thing, I guess, is procurement. So how does the port intend to procure the gantry cranes?
Thank you, Senator Perez. There has been a question. Would you like to answer that, Senator Rigel?
Sure. I believe the port will follow the normal procurement procedures that they have in place.
Thank you, Senator Rigel. Senator Perez, you still have the floor. Does that suffice?
Currently, the Port Authority does not have procurement authority, so maybe if the author can explain what were the procedures that they were going to procure that through?
Yes, so you're asking for further clarification based on Port Authority not having procedures in place. Senator Rigel, would you like to answer that?
Sure, I believe they'll follow normal procurement law and normal procurement procedures.
On that matter, Senator Paris?
Not exactly, that's really vague, so.
Okay.
thank you.
Senator Torres, do you have a point of information or a point of inquiry?
I have a point of information, Madam Speaker, that can help with this line of questioning. If you refer to the committee report, on page 11 of the committee report digest, that specific question about gantry cranes was asked by myself at the public hearing. And if I can just give a little overview, the general manager of the port, Mr. Respicio, indicated that initially when the bond was being floated, they had anticipated that if they went out for a larger amount, that larger amount could satisfy the purchase of at least one gantry crane. He did indicate that the crane surcharge is allowing for savings to be realized towards the payment of, towards the acquisition of cranes. But in addition to that, Senator Respicio also, and it's a very long, several paragraphs where he was speaking specifically about gantry cranes, but I just wanted to also mention that Mr. Respicio also mentioned that there is a 2019 MERID grant for port infrastructure, and that is one avenue that they're utilizing to apply for additional fundings for the gantry crane purchases, which they will be replacing 3, I believe, and they had a timeline of 2026, I think, to change out all 3. So for convenience, if you refer to the committee report digest around page 11 and 12, that discussion about the cranes is specifically addressed. I just thought I'd help. Thank you.
Thank you for that insight, Senator Torres. Senator Paris, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just need time to digest for now the information. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Terlahi, you are recognized on the main motion.
Madam Speaker?
Yes, Majority Leader, Vice Speaker Nelson, I will acknowledge.
Sitos Masi, Madam Speaker, I'd like to make a motion that we recess until 2:30 this afternoon.
On that motion, without any objections, we are in recess to 2:30 this afternoon.